Irial, welcome back to the Happier at Work podcast. You are the second guest who has come on twice onto the podcast, so I'm delighted to have you return and to give us a little bit of an update about what you've been up to and to talk about your new book. So, do you want to let people in on, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Yes, thank you, Aoife. It has been a pleasure to be called or to be asked back again to your podcast. And always a pleasure talking with you. So since we last, I think when I last was on the podcast, we were talking about my book, Smart Objective Setting for Managers.
Yes.
And as a follow-up to that, I wrote The Manager's Dilemma, How to Empower Your Team's Problem Solving, which as a concept came very much from my own personal experiences of managing people. And so I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit more detail. So I have focused in on writing that and publishing that, and also getting the Smart Objective Setting for Managers on an audio book. So that has come out on audio.
Brilliant. So we've been very busy. And
Yes.
yes, like it's been really, like we're connected on LinkedIn, obviously. And it's been really great to watch the journey of, and what cover should I use and what should the book actually be called? Here's the concept of what it's about, but
Yes.
what should it be called? So it's been really great to kind of watch the journey, the evolution of how that has all come about. And now you have the final product, which I have read and thoroughly enjoyed and have loads of notes on. And really resonated. I'm not managing anyone as such now because I run my own business. But as I start taking people on, it's something I definitely need to bear in mind. But also, I could think back to when I was managing people in the past, or even when I was being managed by other people, and how how it all ties in together. What do you think in relation to describing the overall like meaning of the book, or what it's all about? How would you describe it?
Yeah, well, the book is definitely resonating with a lot of managers. So when I talk about it, or if they read it, they're like, "Oh yes, this
This is
I can
me,
relate."
heads nodding, screaming out, yes, yes.
Yes, absolutely. And really, it is. Um, in my experience, and as I said, the book, the concept of or where I identified it first was my own experience of managing people, and then in terms of, because I do a lot of executive coaching and mentoring and leadership development, and that, I had I was listening to a group of people as part of a mentoring program, and they were talking, and I was going, "Oh, hold on a second, I've heard this, I've experienced this
Yeah,
before." And I threw my concept out on the table to them, and they were all like, "Yes, that's it." And what it is well, for me is managers, people who tend to do well in management tend to be good problem solvers. Now, I don't know if there's a dynamic of people get promoted into management because they are good problem solvers. I suspect that is a large part of it. Or are they good problem solvers because they're in management? I think it's more they get promoted,
it's
get
like a
into,
chicken and egg
yeah,
situation almost. Yeah, okay.
because they're good at because they can see ways around challenges, and they can find ways to move issues and pieces of work and along, whether it's projects, whether it's business as usual, and they'll come up with ways to sort of overcome the issue, and so they get noticed and they get seen. And in reality, who gets promoted is people that are helpful. People stand out in managers' minds. And for any manager listening, think about the people you give pieces of work to or ask for help from. They're ones that are going to kind of move the project along, or move the piece of work along and get it progressed.
Yeah.
And so we tend to give them more, and so therefore they get more opportunities, and they get more exposure, and they get noticed more. And so therefore, when an opportunity arises for promotion, they are more likely, their name is more likely to be in the pot.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, we get promoted because of what we do well, which is problem solving. But of course, when we're in the when we're promoted up and somebody brings up an issue to us, what does somebody who's very good at problem solving tend to do? The natural response is to problem solve.
Yeah.
Their role has now changed. So there's this dilemma, or this dichotomy of I tend to be good at problem solving, or I naturally tend to be a good problem solver. So therefore, when an issue is put in front of me, I will seek to solve the problem and seek to come to a solution. However, my role is now to develop other people and to enable other people on the team to be able to do their own work. And is this an issue that they really should be able to solve themselves, and I need to coach them through the process, or do I just take it from them or just give them the answer because it's faster? And so
Yeah.
there's this real dichotomy that arises, and that's the dilemma for managers.
Yeah.
They've been promoted based on being good at problem solving,
Mm.
and they've been rewarded for that. And what we tend to do is to keep doing what we're rewarded for, because we were rewarded. And if we were rewarded once, we'll be rewarded again, and
Yeah.
rewarded again. So why wouldn't we keep doing that?
Yeah.
And, you know, whereas in reality, when you get to a certain level, you know, if you have a team of 5, you can do that. If you get up to a team of 15, or you get into a team of 20 or 50 with 3 levels, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So actually, while in the short term it seems a good idea, in the longer term it's actually has a
It's
negative
detrimental. Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
to the manager and obviously
Yeah.
to the team as well.
Yeah.
So that's really the crux of the book, is that whole dichotomy, that whole dilemma that
Yeah.
managers end up unwittingly in. I mean, I don't think an awful lot of people, they end up in the situation, but they're not intentionally ending up in the situation. They're not
Yeah.
consciously ending up in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of
Well,
it is unconscious for them.
I was going to ask and maybe take a little step back, before diving into the concept of the book, on your thoughts or maybe a discussion around this idea of people being promoted and whether or not people actually want to be managers, or whether it's the prestige associated. I know this has come up quite a bit on the podcast in previous episodes, where we talk about this idea of, you know, that exactly what you're talking about. You're good at what it is that you do, but you want to continue doing that, but then you want to get paid more, you want to get the recognition for, and the clear way to do that is to become a manager in most organizations.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that being kind of a dilemma pre-manager, that do I want to actually manage people and develop them, or do I want to become an expert?
Yeah. And this is, as I do some work with clients around org design as well, and this is a regular conversation that
Yeah.
comes up for individuals, for managers, for organizational. How do we set out the organization? And even in conversations with org design specialists that are working in companies, they're saying, well, we've introduced more expert roles, and I mean, my question was, well, is that to a certain level? Because at some point there is I know there's been, org design wise, there's been a move towards flatter organizations and
Mm.
more
Kind of
autonomy.
lateral moves and things like that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are trade-offs with all of this.
Mm.
There are trade-offs around getting people to the level of being autonomous sufficiently, to develop them sufficiently to be autonomous enough to be able to run with things and to
Yeah.
really run it at a certain level. So there's the process of getting people up to that level of autonomy where they can act as an expert and be and I suppose the value of being an expert being produced within the organization's performance. There's also the piece around the cost of that. Like if you're an expert and you're being paid 100,000 versus 3 people who are doing something at a more junior level and maybe on 30,000, there's
Mm.
trade-off. So you have to really show a huge amount of value at that level. And they're just examples, monetary value, but
Yeah.
there's only so many of those roles an organization can they can deliver on, because their business model is set out. When you price things, whether it's a product or a service, when you price it, there's the cost of the labor, which is obviously the biggest cost. There's the
Mm.
cost of the other, the insurance and the whatever other, the property, the office block, although that's
Yeah.
somewhat up in the air at the moment. But there's the cost of all of that or whatever, right? And all of that, and then there's the profit. Okay, so all of that gets put into the price of the product or service from the business model perspective. So if you introduce a load of experts at a much more a senior, higher price tag in a very practical business, running a
Mm.
business, running a profitable business or whatever, there's only so many of those roles you can have.
Yeah.
You can have more managers because they are responsible for a huge amount more work. You could be a manager could be responsible for the work outputs of 20 people. So you can justify the value, the cost
Yeah.
of that
Yeah. Yeah.
much more than you can justify the cost of 20, paying 20 experts.
Yeah.
You still only produce the output of 20 experts.
I think that's a really, really valuable point, Ariel, and it's not something that I've heard people talk about in such an articulate way. And it's so important to consider because that, like, I suppose the future of work is to offer people these opportunities where if they don't want to develop people, if that's not where their core skill set lies, then they have opportunities. But you make a really valid point as if you want to earn more money, ultimately really what you're going to have to do is brush up your skill set and learn how to develop other people or put other people at the center of what it is that you're doing or achieve results through other people. Like that's ultimately where we want to end up.
Yeah. Or you have to be so productive. The outcome, the value of what you produce to the business has to be so worth so much.
Yeah.
So there are experts that absolutely do get huge paid large amounts of money because of the value that they bring to the organization, and the expertise is so um, unique or is so uh, rare. Like it's so hard to get
Yeah.
that you bring that level of value to the organization.
Yeah.
So and again, you get a lot of this in the tech world in terms of program developers or
Yeah.
whatever, because they can develop something that will then go on to be sold to
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
thousands of people. So their output might be, it's the what the company can do with that output is so valuable that the company can go, yes, we can justify this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If you're doing, but there's a lot of roles that and a lot of functions that don't add that level of value
Yeah.
because you have that expertise. It's that you have to have a sufficiently large impact on the organization or other people within the organization,
Yeah.
a multiplier effect of what
Mm.
the person is earning. And so that in it, so if you kind of apply that to the business model, in effect, you end up with a pyramid of there are
Yeah.
so many
I
positions.
always thought it looks like a pyramid scheme, when you start going working in these large organizations.
Yeah,
There's one CEO at the top and
yeah, yeah. And there's only one head of whatever the different functions are
yeah.
and stuff or whatever. And the idea is that if you're head of a function, the idea is that the value you bring in running that function, and that the vision you bring to that function, the alignment you bring to the purpose of the function within the organization, the process, as I said, the productivity of that function in terms of the organization's ability to deliver its overall objectives or whatever, that's where the value comes. And so that's why somebody at that level can be paid more,
Yeah.
because they're leveraging the whole capability of the function.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back around to this idea of dilemma. And one thing that sprung to mind as you were talking about the dilemma was not just that managers are good problem solvers, but they actually enjoy doing it as well. It's something that actually gives them this sense of purpose, or gives them a sense of fulfillment at work when they are able to solve those problems. Is that something that you think is maybe an issue as well?
Yeah, and like, to be honest, if one is a good problem solver but doesn't want to necessarily manage, like being a troubleshooter within an organization and being able to problem solve real big issues that are going on in an organization, that isn't a way of being an expert and leveraging your value to the leveraging that capability and increasing the value to the organization. Um, so like, I suppose, that's where you end up with org design people, or you end up with product design people where they can
Mm,
be, they're experts, they're very good at problem solving. So and project managers can often be very good at problem solving, and they're moving things on. So problem solving in itself is I've actually never come across an organization that doesn't value and doesn't require the skill of problem solving.
mm,
And I would, over the years, have done an awful lot of work around competency frameworks, and
yeah.
of moving into role dimensions. And I've never, and I've worked with numerous companies in that space. And problem solving is always one of those ones that come up as a requirement, as a core competency. What they expect of it might be slightly different from organization to organization, but I've yet to come across an organization that doesn't value it. I think I suppose what ends up happening is a lot of times the problem solving ends up residing in the manager's role, because managers are good at it. And so, so it sort of naturally, it's not necessarily that it only needs to reside in managers. It's just that people that tend to be good, they get promoted up, which is into management, and it ends up into that process. So I think there probably is an argument for an organization who's very clearly thinking about its capabilities and what it needs, and kind of saying, well, maybe there are some expert roles around problem solving and troubleshooting or whatever, but I don't think they're having the conversations or thinking about it in that term. That's actually what a huge amount of what they value in managers. Do you know what I mean?
Already, yeah. That kind of brings us on to this, and this is one of the kind of the first notes that I took from the book, is the idea of completing tasks at the right level. And it sort of ties in with what you were talking about a second ago, about this expert status and how much people get paid versus multiple junior roles getting paid kind of less, like having 3 at 30k rather than 1 at 100k, and you get more people, all of this kind of stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that issue of doing tasks at that right level?
Oh, I love this topic.
So do I.
And years ago, when I was managing a team, I was basically the head that ran the training, learning, development team in an organization, and as I got involved in all sorts of things, involved in competency frameworks and performance management design and recruitment process design, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I did, and this has gone back many, many years, but even then I was kind of saying, I did an analysis of how, you take 10% of work being escalated up and being pushed up into the next level up of an organization within a team. And very, very quickly, the team lead, the manager, very, very quickly gets swamped.
Yeah.
You kind of think, 10% isn't that much. You do the figures on it or whatever, and very quickly your team lead is doing nothing but 10% of other people's jobs.
And
that's a lot of work that they're not doing of their own job. So I've always been fascinated with this concept of, what is the purpose of each role?
The
output of each role. What should each role deliver? What, the output and the volumes of outputs. And how much should that be done, and at that level, and then what's the purpose of the next level up, and and the next level up again. So you work all the way up, and in reality, what happens is people do get promoted. They show good. I've never come across an industry that doesn't promote off the back of somebody's technical capabilities. You think about the technical capabilities and problems.
Absolutely. Happens all the time.
Technical. So I've never come across anybody who's ever said to me, well, actually, in our organization, we do promote on people's demonstrable ability to manage people.
But
he's even challenged that with me.
But maybe can we dive into that a little bit and say, how can we change that? I know, like, the perception for me, like, if I'm thinking as an individual, and if someone was promoted who maybe had less experience than I did, and this has happened in the past, if they had less experience, or if they weren't familiar with the industry, all of these kind of stuff plays into that, and the emotions are rising now. I'm like, no, I hope that doesn't happen. However, at the same time, like, maybe it's an entire paradigm shift that needs to happen in work, where we say people who are good at focusing on other people, of developing other people, of getting the best from other people, are the ones that need to be promoted to be managers. And that it's still that kind of flat structure almost, that the prestige maybe isn't associated as much with the manager, but it's just a different skill set that people have in relation to getting the best out of others.
So there's an awful lot there to unpack. So one of the things, in my experience, is that there is a lack of clarity around what the purpose of different levels are, and a lack of clarity around how roles change.
And a reliance, you might say, on job descriptions, which are also used as job ads, which are also used as... And
job descriptions are generic by definition. They have to be whatever. So one of the things I've actually started doing with organizations is um, building out role dimensions. So it's like a combination of competencies, technical outputs, standards, volumes, that kind of stuff, plus so there's technical, there's outputs, what the role is designed to deliver, and competency behaviors. Okay, so the likes of problem solving, what exactly do we expect, etc. But then what happens is I develop that out by job family. So what people can actually see is the development of the skill set and how it changes over time.
Yeah.
And what happens is over time, for managers, the more you move into management, the less it's about your technical skills and the more it is about your ability to develop, to plan, to have a vision, to lead people, and so in reality, even the best organizations in the world, they might have all of their technical processes mapped. Okay. If you actually go in and talk to them about what are your management processes, many of the management processes aren't mapped, aren't clearly defined. It is assumed. So, most people don't focus in on, most organizations, most managers aren't trained to, how do you train on the job? How do you share knowledge? How do you hold people accountable for applying that knowledge and developing them up to be able to take on the responsibilities of the tasks that is part of their role? And nobody sits down with managers and says, this is how your role is now going to change. These are how the skills are you are now going to need to develop. There is none of that conversation. There is none of that clear understanding. And that's what the role dimensions do. It articulates what's different about each of the roles and how the skills need to develop.
Yeah.
And change, and the
that's
knowledge.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And it's more than just, as I've mentioned already, I've done a huge amount of work in competencies. But what I find with organizations and managers in particular within organizations is the organization might have a competency framework, but it's not intuitive to the manager. The manager doesn't understand, how do I take this and
how do I translate it? Yeah.
They really struggle. They're going, that may be so, but I don't understand how that competency framework relates to the jobs in my team.
Yeah.
And so where the role dimensions makes it much more specific to the job family, and the manager can go, oh, okay, I see how this develops. And but also everybody in the team sees how it develops. So the conversations can now start being had with people around. The person goes, well, I only like technical stuff or whatever. And it's like, that's fine, but that only brings you to this level.
Yeah.
See here at this next level, you need to start looking at networking, or you need to start looking at influencing much more heavily, or you need to start looking at whatever it is.
Yeah.
People, they can see how they need to develop in what ways, but they can also see that it's only maybe a slight step up in 5 different areas. And that doesn't seem quite as scary.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't really know what it is a manager does, and it doesn't look like much fun, which is what you get a lot of people saying.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it is. It doesn't look like much fun. It looks
dealing
like
with other people's issues, their personal problems. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, of course, if the manager is struggling in doing those things and things keep crowding in on the manager, and the manager is taking on other people's work that they shouldn't really, of course it's going to look quite scary and not much fun and not something people want to do.
Yeah.
So by having kind of a much clearer, so what happens when managers get promoted, going back to you were kind of saying about managers, kind of the work being done at the right levels. Managers have by understanding the role dimensions, the managers have a much better understanding of what the roles are expected from in talking to managers, I often find they don't really know what the expectations of a role is, and what are they supposed to deliver.
Yeah. I find that a lot, Irial, that managers maybe don't even understand the expectation of them. So how can they then explain the expectation of someone below them? And I think for me, setting clear expectations is really critical for work generally, like just to actually do work, knowing what you're there for, knowing the purpose, knowing what good looks like, what excellent looks like, what's good enough versus what's not really worth spending the extra hour or couple of hours on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is just so prevalent. And what happens with managers when they get promoted up, so aside from the problem solving piece that the
Yeah.
book is about, the manager doesn't really know what's different about their role or what they should be doing or what skill sets they should be applying.
Yeah.
And so in the absence of not knowing that and not being sure about it, and again, that these things aren't necessarily clearly articulated within organizations and clearly mapped out, what they do is they kind of go, well, I liked this bit of my old job.
Yeah.
I'll take that with me. So I'll
Yeah.
take bits with me.
Yeah.
So they might take bits with them. And so the levels below them, whatever number of levels that is, whatever bits of their job are being taken off them, and then they might also have parts of their job that they're not sure about, and they escalate and they kind of go, I need some help here, some
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And the manager goes, I'll just take it from you. Oh, okay, very grand. And
Yeah.
there's some people who get irritated with that. There's some people who kind of go, woohoo, here you go, here's another
Yeah.
load of stuff as well.
Yeah.
And then there's other people who kind of go, just the way it is, and I'll just kind of keep ticking on, do my
Yeah.
own bits and pieces,
Well,
whatever.
that's almost like the full circle. That comes back to this is the work being done at the incorrect level, and
Yeah,
it comes back to this idea of how much you're getting paid for the skills that you have and what you should be doing, and the breakdown of what you're getting paid versus the impact that you're having on the
yeah,
organization your capabilities or your ability to
yeah,
develop other people and all of that.
yeah. And you bring that back into the org design, and you bring it back into the business model, and the whole thing gets out of sync.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it ends up, in effect, it's costing the business an awful lot more to deliver the outputs or the outcomes of whatever it is, the products or
Yeah.
services
Yeah.
that they're selling.
Yeah.
And so that makes them less profitable, or it makes them, it has the knock-on impact on
Yeah, they're less
the
productive and
business
therefore
model.
they're less, yeah, ultimately it's impacting on their profits, but it's as a
Yeah,
result of people. And I think for me, always when you focus on people first and, you know, putting the focus back on, for me, creating those happier working environments, but this includes all of those things that you talked about. Um, the profits will follow from that, and
yeah,
it's focusing on the people element first. But what you were talking about sort of ties in with another one of the notes that I had, and this is the area of performance management. So someone might be cruising along thinking, I'm actually doing a good job here, when they haven't received any feedback to the contrary, or they don't understand what the expectations are, and therefore they just assume that they're doing a good job. Do you want? I mean, in performance management, there's lots, I suppose, to talk about in relation to that. Like, and the future of work, it seems, is moving away from this idea of performance management, but I'm not entirely sure what the alternative to
yeah,
that is.
yeah. And I'm going to link it also into, the Great Resignation and people being
Yeah, of
unhappy and
course.
all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
whatever. And when you read through a lot of the articles on it, a lot of times people are leaving because they are being left to flounder, and they are being
yeah,
left to their own devices, and they're
yeah,
not being developed, and they're not really getting real feedback. They're being left to flounder. They're not being, they don't see where they're going in the organization. They don't see a connection to the organization. And you couple that with work is gotten much more complex than the work that was done 20 or 30 years ago. And again, I'll bring this back to the entry, the more inexperienced people and how they need to be developed up. Um, People are coming into organizations and they're looking to be developed, and they need to be developed. But the level of complexity of what they did, like if you, I don't know if I do it in this book or in the smart book, but if you take, say, accountancy, back in the day, accountants were, you learned, you almost learned from first principles, right? Here's the receipts, put them into the ledger. So that, you learned all that. There was an awful lot of grunt work to it, but you learned it all and you built on top of that, right?
mm,
And so you had a very from first principles understanding of the work of an accountant, for example. But now the so much of that is scanned in and is now available in the system, which means that what you are focusing your work in on as an entry level type person is much more around analysis and understanding, and it's sort of, um, which is an awful lot. It's a lot higher level work, and it's more complex work because you mightn't
yeah,
have the understanding behind it
yeah,
that you would have built up in the old ways. Okay.
yeah.
So all of a sudden, the manager isn't just going, take this receipt, put it into a credit or a debit, and da da da, and keep doing that, right? All of
Mm.
a sudden, it's like, I now have to explain or need to make sure that your understanding of the concepts are in place so that you can analyze it sufficiently so you can identify something that isn't right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All of a sudden, the ability to train somebody up and to develop them has become an awful lot more complex.
Yeah.
And to break that down into its constituent parts, to be able to impart that or whatever, is becoming so much more complex. And so people, you know, if managers, and whether that's team leaders or whoever it is having problems with doing that for people, you can see how people are getting left floundering and left
Yeah.
frustrated and left leaving.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that it gets into this whole the great resignation piece or whatever, where they're frustrated around and they're leaving.
They don't feel valued at work. Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
feel valued, and they don't feel they're developing, and they don't feel they're really understanding what they're doing. So they've
Mm.
kind of got this level of constant level of not really being sure, and again, bringing in the imposter syndrome, kind of
Yeah.
feeling quite right. And that's a level of uncomfortableness that
Yeah.
people kind of are. It's not much fun living with on a regular basis,
No.
right? And so people kind of go, well, I'll go somewhere else, and they find out it's not necessarily much better anywhere else.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
they're now
Yeah.
kind of going, geez, now what do I do? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
now
I
can I
really
get
must be an
into
imposter.
yeah. So it doesn't help them. So then linking that back to performance management, and it also links back to what I was already talking about the role dimensions and the expectations and having the clear vision of this is what this role is about, and this
Mm.
is what you need to master in order to get to a level of mastery in this role to
Yeah.
be feeling that you're doing well and then ready for the next opportunity.
Mm.
So as part of the start of your career development and that. Um, so like we talk about performance management and it losing its sort of role and that kind of stuff. I don't think it has been updated to take understanding of the complexities of the knowledge work. It
Yeah.
was designed in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 1960s around, you know, output of widgets. It was a lot to do with production lines and
Yeah.
with inflation and who are we going to pay a bit more to, whatever. I mean, that was where it came from. So I think it needs to be updated to, and again, this is where I've worked with clients around the role dimensions piece, around designing that out and setting out the clear expectations. This is what I've found is when I've introduced this model to organizations and we've sat down and talked to people, they've been kind of went, I didn't know that was part of my job. I didn't know
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds
that.
familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know I was. And then you're going to go, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's why we're having this discussion. And they're
Mm.
going, that makes perfect sense. I get where you're going. I get what I'm supposed to be doing now. I
Yeah.
get why these things are all important. And not only do I get why they're important in this role, but I get why they're important in my next role.
Mm.
I get where I need to develop them out now and how it'll adjust and increase the what's expected of me in this area.
Yeah.
In the next level, I see how that will increase. And that to me is the purpose. And I've actually moved away from calling it performance management to performance development, because I
Okay.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
more akin to what we need to be doing. It's much more reflective of this isn't about managing your performance. This is about developing you into being mastered in your role,
Yeah.
mastered in all elements of it. And a lot of times, especially at the junior levels, and it makes sense at the junior levels, but a lot of times it's like people are trained up to just do the work of the job. They don't necessarily bring in their role in supporting the organization.
Yeah, like the thinking that goes behind it, the kind of critical analysis. Is this really necessary, or am I doubling up
Yeah,
here? Or well, like, what's the purpose of this? Or am I delivering this to a client? And could we find a more efficient way to do it? There's loads of things, I
yeah,
think. So yeah, like, I mean, are those things that people naturally have, or are they things that that it needs to be called out to them and then they can figure it out, or do they need to be trained in how to do that?
yeah. And if you're in a junior role or whatever, it does need to be, because that's part of what connects you to the organization around
Mm.
having that I'm not just a person here doing this. It's that I have a connection with the organization, and equally the organization has a connection with the individual. It's not just a one-way thing. but by putting in the effort to really develop out an effective performance development process and training the people, the managers in particular, on how to develop people and the skills and the approach to it and all that, and having an understanding that in itself is a commitment to people's development.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, even the language going from performance management to performance development, it's recognizing, well, it is going to take time. And there's so many roles. And again, I don't think this is being properly acknowledged or taken into consideration. Going back to the example of the accountant, if it is more complex, it is going to take longer to master.
Yeah.
Whereas there's almost this expectation of like, it should take 3 months and you're done. Do you know?
Yeah, yeah. Now you should know everything.
And you're kind of going, no, because it's so much more complex. So you need an amount of experience and knowledge and background understanding and all that kind of stuff to be able to properly do the job to the right level.
Yeah.
And so I mean, there are some roles and there are some industries or whatever that may still be true, that you can master the job in 3 months or whatever, and you're up to speed or whatever, and absolutely. But there are an awful lot more jobs and an awful lot more industries that are getting much more complex.
Yeah.
So it's not about performance management, or it's only becomes performance management after you've been 2 or 3 years in the role and you've mastered the role. That's when it becomes performance management. Up till then, it's been performance development.
Yeah.
Still learning the role.
Yeah.
So I think that's look, I could talk for hours on it.
Yeah, but it's a really good point, I think. And for me, it's something I always talk about, is one of the needs for relatedness, and that is, for me, it's the sense of belonging with your teammates and getting along with other people in the organization. But it's also that connection with the organization, and what I do on a day-to-day basis matters. And here's the impact that I'm making on the organization, and here is the direct impact on the client or the internal person that you're dealing with, and really making it obvious and spelling out for people, especially, as you said, in those more junior roles, what this actually means and what the impact is. Irial, I just want to check on time. It's 12 o'clock now. Are you okay to keep on going?
Yep, I can. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Because I don't think we've even got to half of what we wanted to talk about.
Another take a step back, Aoife.
This is it. Yeah, this is it. Another one of the areas, I suppose, and this is more kind of generic on the book, is it can be the idea that from a manager's perspective, it's tempting to jump in and solve the problem, but from the individual's perspective, it's tempting to offload the thinking and the workload to your manager. And we kind of touched on that a little bit already, and the easy temptation that actually is, and how easy it is for that to happen, and the resulting of it's not, the work is not being done at the right level, but how easy it is for that kind of thing to happen. And it kind of results in this lack of autonomy then for taking responsibility. And maybe you've kind of almost answered that already in relation to this role dimensions work that you do, because that kind of solves that problem, and setting the really clear expectations of what needs to be done. But even going beyond that and explaining to people the impact of you escalating something, or the impact of you taking on work that needs to be done at a different level is this, and this is how it impacts the organization.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I think we probably have talked about it in terms of the infrastructures and the broad overview of it. I remember one person said to me, shared a story with me, who had read the book, shared a story with me that he had been, seconded to a particular team in a different country, and he was solving all the problems. It was that classic solving all the problems, and everybody was coming.
He goes in and he's like, right, I'm here to solve all the problems that you've ever had.
So he did whatever he was supposed to do. The team were just coming to him the whole time. What about this? What about that? What about the other? So whatever length of time he was there, he went back home to his own country, and they kept calling him the whole time. What do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? So he actually had sort of embedded himself so deeply, unintentionally,
But
And
generated additional work for himself, surely, as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
absolutely. But also to the point where he couldn't they wouldn't let him go. So he was actually holding himself back
Yeah.
unwittingly, because then he had to go back in. He had to
Yeah.
go back and he had to
Yeah.
go. So
And it's
and
so it becomes more about empowering other people to be able to solve their own problems, which is
yes,
again like the kind of the key point of the book.
yes,
Yeah.
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 And then it also allows the manager. So it's empowering the team, but it's also empowering the manager, because constantly answering people's questions and giving them the answers and dealing with their problems actually disempowers the manager
Yeah.
as much as it disempowers the team.
Because it holds them back
Oh,
slightly as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they're
Okay.
not focusing in on the things that they're supposed to be doing, and they're too busy. And then opportunities don't come up for them. And so the whole thing kind of ends up in this sort of
Yeah.
downward spiral,
Yeah.
completely, oftentimes, completely unintentionally.
Yeah. 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 I
Important thing
think
here is that a lot of it is unintentional. It is,
yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things could be an issue of time. So people are under so much time
yes,
pressure these days. And it takes more time to
yes,
explain to someone how to solve their own problem rather than just taking it off them and doing it yourself. And it's that investment of time that is required up front for the kind of the longer term. And maybe it's the quick payoff of, oh, I'll just do it this time and the next time I'll teach them how to do it themselves or whatever it might be. Any thoughts on the kind of causes? Like, what are the main
yeah.
causes of this?
A huge part of it is it just seems faster, and that is absolutely uh, it's the short-term pain versus the
Mm,
long-term gain.
yeah,
Or it feels like the short-term gain, but actually it's leading to long-term pain.
yeah,
And this actually, this is something I've done for many, many years. I get this comes up regularly in management training programs, and I get the guys to do up the figures from it. And if you do up the figures on a 10-minute task that you do every day, or a 50-minute like an hour task you take from somebody that you really shouldn't be taking from somebody, and you multiply it out, it turns out it is, if you were to train them up on how to do the task, it might take you something like half a day.
mm,
And but if you keep doing the task over a year, it's the equivalent of about a week.
wow,
Yeah. So I do that regularly. I do up the numbers and let them work it through, whatever, and you can see their jaws drop and go,
yeah,
oh, and you're going, and that's just one task
yeah,
they're not supposed to be doing.
yeah,
And then they go, oh, now I understand why I'm working my overtime so
yeah,
much.
yeah, 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 yeah,
On that, like, and this is years ago. It's going back to that company when I was working. I was running the learning team, the development team, and we had somebody in on a guy who was newly promoted up, and they were really in bad shape in terms of, and he was in really, there was a lot of time being spent trying to get through his mindset shift, getting his mindset to shift.
yeah.
Anyway, it was a 2.5 day course. We clearly the mindset did shift. Because I met him about 3 months, 6 months later, I think I met him, and he was all, and the guy was just like attending the course. He could barely find the time to attend the course, and it was just about 6 months later, I met him, and I was like, "Oh, you don't normally meet you here?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah." And he was like, "Oh yeah, no, it's all great." And I was like, "Really, what happened?" He was like, "Oh yeah, took what you talked about in the program, put it into practice, completely changed around." I said, "That's great. Would you come to the next session and talk to the guys or whatever
Mm,
that?" He's like, "Absolutely." And he said, "Because I have time now."
yeah,
So we went, and he was explaining how horrendously the team had been performing,
mm,
how in 3 months, and it was a monthly cycle that they were on, so three cycles basically, how within 3 months they had completely and utterly turned it around.
that's incredible.
Well, yeah, well, and one people were like, "Oh my goodness," and he said they were like, "Where did you find the time?" Because they were working 14-hour days, 2 out of every 4 weeks.
Yeah,
This had been what had been going on, and they said, "Where did you find the time on this?" And he said, "When the 15th hour is the hour that's digging you out of the hole, that's the most important."
okay, yeah, yeah,
So he recognized, yes, this is an additional hour on top of my 14-hour days,
mm,
but this is the hour that's going to actually make the difference
make the difference. Yeah,
I'm going to get out of this. So
yeah,
it was the short-term pain of
yeah,
a few more hours, but the long-term gain of my team is now functioning at the level it's supposed to. The work is being
yeah.
done at the right level. And that was a perfect example of the more junior people were like skipping out the door at 5 o'clock every day of the month, whatever, while the team leads, the assistant manager, the manager, were all working 14-hour days
Yeah.
forward.
Because they hadn't taught people how to do kind of the more basic stuff, and they're just
Yes.
cruising along.
And the quality of the work was like the client was in effect doing the quality checks on the work
Oh
because
wow.
they were too busy doing the work,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that the client was. So the client, as you can well imagine, was jumping up and down, going bananas.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah,
found this mistake.
yeah,
Send it back the
yeah,
report. So there's an error here in one
yeah,
of your formulas. Yeah, it rings a bell. So
yeah,
it's really about like investing time up front. And I think that, I mean, you can apply that principle or that concept across the board, really, like doing that reflection piece or really looking at how am I spending my time, and not just time, but like, what are the things that I'm doing, and what do I not need to do? What do I really need to do? Who should be doing what things?
yeah.
I think you can kind of apply that to lots and lots of different situations. Um,
Yes.
Ariel, I'm kind of conscious that we've talked around the book rather than talking about it. Is there anything in particular that you wanted to share? I know like there's examples of the different types of people and the different types of issues that people encounter. I don't know, do you want to kind of touch on that, or do you want to leave that for people to actually read in the book when they go out and buy it themselves?
Yeah, I think I suppose just for listeners who are thinking what exactly is the book about, what we have talked about, I suppose some of it is the mindset of the manager, and that we talked about, and the dilemma, which that having been good at problem solving, and then and then kind of just solving people's problems for them, whether it's giving them the answer or taking it from them. But the book also goes into actually how do you what are the steps of problem solving? Because a lot of times, we go through the problem solving steps so quickly that we're actually not that clear around what the
Mm.
problem solving steps are. So one of the things in the book does very, I think, explicitly, and feedback has come back from people of actually just having that framework for just
Yeah. And just
different
knowing, I
steps of
think,
problem
which
solving.
step each individual is at and being able
Yeah,
to identify that is really
is
useful.
yeah. So breaking down the steps into their constituent parts and what the purpose of each step is, I think is even just having that clarity for managers to recognize, oh, okay, these are the steps that I go through very quickly, because managers, because it's so innate to them,
Yeah. It's
they
almost
have already,
unconscious, isn't it?
yeah,
That, yeah.
they've already, like,
They're
they
10
might have
steps
already,
ahead.
yeah, they might have already gone through about 3 or 4 steps in what feels like one step to
Yeah.
them.
Mm.
So by breaking it down into the constituent parts, it makes it easier to see where which step somebody might be getting stuck on.
Yeah.
And that's then the second half of the book very much goes into kind of I suppose the archetypes of who
Mm.
shows up in the workplace and where they might get stuck on each of the steps, what that
Yeah.
might look like. But also how would you develop them from that point if you've
Yeah.
identified, well, actually, I've got somebody who's a great problem identifier, but doesn't that, and they think their job is done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they bring it to me, I need to get them from identifying that identifying, being good at identifying the problem, right the way through process of, do I need to spend any time? I might have identified the problem, but do I need to actually spend any time solving this problem?
Mm.
Problem identifiers seem to have a tendency to see all problems that they identify as the same impact,
Okay.
same level of importance, when in
Mm.
reality they're not. But because they think their job is only to identify the problems, they go, well, I've identified it, so you sort
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
the
Yeah. 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 Now I
progress
escalate it to you to
any
solve
further.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're kind of taking people from that stage, if you've got somebody who's getting stuck at that step, right the way through to, trust and confidence, which is, the belief in themselves to make
Mm.
the decisions, to
Yeah.
kind of, this is the solution. And so there are a lot of different ways in which an individual can get stuck along the problem solving process. And
Yeah.
so the book also helps managers. It's not just around them kind of, I suppose, examining their own mindset around the problem solving and how they approach it with their team. But it's also around helping them to be able to identify which people on my team are getting stuck at which step, and how would I develop them? How would I build that confidence in them
Mm.
at each stage, to get them to be competent at
Yeah.
most problems. But also it also goes into, which I think is also really, really important, is goes into the what are valid reasons for escalation and what are invalid reasons
Yeah.
for escalation.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we don't, as managers, we don't necessarily differentiate between them. We just go, oh, it has been escalated, and so
Mm.
therefore I have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, well, actually, these are valid reasons for escalation.
Mm.
These are not valid reasons for escalation. You don't necessarily explain to people what the invalid reasons are, but certainly having a conversation around what the valid reasons for escalation are is appropriate so that people understand that, but also what the expectations are when somebody is escalating an issue to the manager. That
Yeah.
it's not just that I identified it, here you go, sort it.
Yeah.
It's the, well, what have you done about it, and
Mm.
where have you gotten it from, and what are you looking for from me in
Yeah.
turn? What
Yeah.
is the real ask here? And I do reference this in the States, for example. It's very common for a manager to go, what's the ask? But even in that, it's, I don't think that that's halfway towards how that needs to be framed. It's not just what's the ask, it's what have you, that might be the ask, but what have you done in
Yeah.
relation to solving this yourself? And now what's the ask?
Yeah.
So,
What have you already tried? What
yeah,
solutions have you looked at? How far have you got in terms of identifying how big of a problem this is? All
exactly.
of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where are they getting stuck? And
Yeah.
so it's kind of helping them to see where they're typically getting stuck, and then how they can be coached through to build up their confidence. I mean, the ultimate aim is that the team members are confident in their problem solving abilities.
Yeah.
Um, and then, for issues that are mainly within their remit of their role, you're not necessarily expecting them to solve all problems, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I expect you to be able to deal with 90% of what turns up in your own role.
Yeah.
You've mastered it, kind of, you're going to be able to deal with roughly 90%, 80, 90% or whatever. And there may be things that you need help with, and that, but that's one of the valid reasons of escalation.
Mm.
But I expect you to have done a decent amount and brought it to a certain point.
Yeah.
So around that understanding, actually, what's the problem solving process? What are the valid reasons for escalating? How do I develop people from wherever their starting point is to being competent in developing their problem solving to be able to deal with most of the things, and for those things that they are escalating with to me or whatever, that they're doing so and signposting it in the right way, and that they've done sufficient amount.
Yeah.
That I'm now only coming in and kind of coaching them to the end bit, as opposed to taking it away and getting it sorted for them.
Mm. Yeah.
A very, very different
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And one of I think the key points that comes across in the book is the manager as coach. So it's not manager as problem solver, it's manager as coach, and developing people through that. And like for me, from what you've said, from what I've experienced as a manager, for what I've experienced as an employee, this is a game changer. How much time can be saved from doing this. And in this age of everyone's so busy and there's back to back meetings and there's this, don't get me started on the meetings, and especially when they're back to back. But like just taking that additional time to invest in developing people to solve their own problems, in taking the time to think about things a little, where do I need to step in versus where do I not need to step in, and having that much more clarity. I think for me it's a game changer from a productivity perspective and from a performance
Yes.
perspective, reducing the amount of work that you actually need to do and improving your performance at the same time.
Yes. Yes. And then everybody wins as well, because
Mm,
they're more confident, they're more competent in their
yeah,
role, they're more confident, they're more engaged, they're more, that goes into one's motivations, the mastery and that type of thing.
yeah,
And then they're ready and able for the next opportunity, and whether that's a development into a different role, or if it's development into a promotion, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, it all starts begetting itself.
yeah,
And they get promoted, so they might get an opportunity, might get volunteered for this opportunity, they get exposure to it, they go, actually, I really like that, or that was a
yeah,
great thing, or
mm,
enjoyed that, or my profile has now increased or whatever, so now I'm more noticed within the organ,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
people, all that kind of stuff. And that, like, that's part of, so now we're getting into a person's long-term, career development and that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
so they're going to naturally, when they have built up their confidence that they can do this or whatever, that just opens so many doors for them in terms of their own self-belief and their own confidence and their
Yeah.
own capabilities. And and that if they say people leave managers, people stay with managers that do that for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Who believe in them, who
Believe in
empower
them,
them.
develop them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely 100%. So Irial, I know that the book is available on Amazon. I know that it has recently been featured on Get Abstract as well. And also you've just finished recording the audio version of the book. So do you want to tell people how they can get it, where they'll find it, where to pick it up?
Yeah. So the Manager's Dilemma: How to Empower Your Team's Problem Solving is available on Amazon. It's also available on my website, evolutionconsulting.ie. And as you said, yes, the summary, if people have access to Get Abstract, the summary is there. And the other book, the audio actually is of the SMART objective setting for managers.
Okay.
So that gets into that whole performance management development conversation we talked about, and it's really around the objective setting part of
Yeah.
performance development process. So that's also available on Amazon and my website, and it is also available in audio. So
Brilliant.
that's the audio book. I will get back to the audio recording of the Manager's Dilemma in late 2022, perhaps.
Okay.
So yeah.
And your third book as well, don't forget.
Oh yes, so the first book that kicked off my writing career is Values Not Just for the Office Wall Plaque: How Personal and Company Values Intersect. And that goes into kind of personal values and identifying them, and how it
and the
impacts on our
importance.
life. The importance of it. And then hopefully in the second half of 2022, the next book on the performance development theories will come out. So that will be focused in on effective feedback.
Brilliant.
So again, that'll link through to setting the expectations properly in the first place, and then being able to. It's a lot easier when you do
You're
that.
You're speaking my language now, Irial.
Feedback, and then just feedback at the ongoing feedback versus the formal feedback.
Oh
or whatever. So
well, I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah.
I look forward to it already. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way? I presume LinkedIn, and you mentioned your website as well, evolutioncoaching.ie.
Evolutionconsulting.ie.
Consulting, sorry.
You're okay. Evolutionconsulting.ie is the website, and LinkedIn, Irial O'Farrell on LinkedIn, and then I'm also on Facebook, evolutionconsulting.ie, and if you just want to follow the books, Irial O'Farrell Books on Facebook as well.
Brilliant. Great. And I mentioned in one of my previous episodes that I'm going to change things up in relation to what I ask people about happiness at work. So normally I ask what makes you happier at work, but I'm changing things up now. I've made the decision to, when I talk about being happier at work, what comes up for you? Like what springs to mind?
And I thought I had my answer all sorted from the last podcast to this question, and then you go and change it. For me, when I hear happier at work, for me it's around contentment. So for me, I'm always a little bit I think happy when we're talking about happiness, I think it's easier to, I suppose the expectation around happiness is that I'm 100% happy all the time, which means if I'm not 100% happy all the time, it can lead to unhappiness. So my personal reflections on this is more around contentment, and which allows for recognizing that maybe not everything is going right all the time, that it's all going 100% right, but that sufficient amount of it is good, is positive, that it's sufficient to be content, and to kind of get that this is where I'm this is worthwhile, and it's worth continuing with.
And it could be that short-term pain for the long-term gain. So it's more thinking about the longer term of, maybe I don't feel entirely happy right now doing this, but actually I know that this is going to contribute to my long-term happiness.
Yes, and some of that, when we might push ourselves out of our boundaries, there can be some of that unhappiness. Oh, I'm not sure about this. But recognizing, but it's moving me towards what I want.
Exactly.
It's really good. And it's interesting. I see it with the books. I'm kind of with the next book. I've kind of got it mapped out, and I've got the started on the book cover. that hasn't gone out on LinkedIn yet because I need to go back and get more versions because I don't like the one from um, but it's interesting when there is that sort of, pain during the process, but when you get to the end of it and you go, oh, that's done now. Oh, that's now available. And that's, and I can see kind of, having 3 books and moving, the audio book, getting that done. And there's quite a
Yeah.
lot of pain in that, shall we
Yeah.
say, even though I knew it was for the greater good for me. Uh,
Yeah.
but you know, there can be that short-term pain piece that can reduce the happiness level.
Yeah.
But recognizing, yes, but it is moving me towards something that I want
A
and
goal
that
towards a sense
longer
of
term.
accomplishment or achievement.
Yes,
Yeah,
is
absolutely. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
so that to me is what comes up for me when I think about that happier.
Yeah. Love it. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Irial. I, as always, thoroughly, thoroughly enjoy our chats. And we probably could have just continued that for another few hours anyway. But always lots to talk about. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
And likewise, Aoife, I could talk to you for hours and hours, and it's been an absolute pleasure.